Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are going to be looking at some advice that stood the test of time. We're diving into Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Part 3?
Part 3, to be exact.
You know, it's a book published almost a century ago.
Right.
But Carnegie's advice is surprisingly relevant today.
Yeah.
Especially this section where he really dives into the psychology of persuasion.
Mm-hmm.
Like how to get people to see things your way.
Yeah.
Without, resorting to those less than ideal tactics.
Yeah. And it's all about just being more effective in your day-to-day interactions.
Like that?
You know, whether you're at work and you're trying to get your team on board with a new project.
Right.
Or you're at home and maybe you're trying to navigate some of those tricky conversations with your family or your friends.
Yeah.
Carnegie, he has some really insightful stuff that can help you handle all of that and more.
And what's interesting is that he doesn't frame it as like some kind of manipulative mind control thing.
Right.
It's more about understanding the human element in these interactions and then using that knowledge to your advantage to kind of guide the conversation in a way that benefits everyone involved.
So less about like winning and more about creating a win-win situation.
Exactly.
Okay. So let's jump into it.
Okay.
What's the first principle that Carnegie tackles?
The first principle, and this might come as a surprise to some people, is avoid arguments.
Wait, really? Avoid arguments? But isn't that like the most common way that people try to like convince each other of something?
Right.
They lay out their arguments and they try to win the debate?
It is, but Carnegie was really onto something here.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever been in a situation where you technically won an argument,
Yeah,
but it left you feeling not so great?
totally.
Maybe even a little resentful.
Yeah.
Even if you prove your point, you can still damage the relationship or at least, create this negative vibe
Yeah, for sure.
that lingers afterwards.
Yeah, it's like even if you're right, it just doesn't feel good.
Right, because what happens when we argue is that our brains go into this defensive mode. We become less receptive to new information because we're so focused on protecting our own viewpoint.
Right.
So even if your logic is sound, the other person's brain is basically shutting down to it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I get why arguments aren't effective, but I mean, disagreements are just a natural part of life, right? Especially at work, you can't just avoid every conflict.
Right. Carnegie's not suggesting we completely avoid disagreements, but rather that we shift our approach.
Okay.
Instead of trying to prove someone wrong, we should focus on finding common ground.
So more about collaboration than confrontation.
Exactly. He uses this example of a workplace scenario where two colleagues are clashing over how to tackle a project.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of, getting locked in an argument, they choose to reframe the conversation and focus on what they both are trying to achieve.
Yeah.
So the shared goal.
Right. It's like taking a step back and saying, okay, wait, what are we both actually trying to accomplish here? Instead of getting stuck in this back and forth.
Exactly. And once you establish that shared objective,
Yeah.
then you can work together to find solutions that actually satisfy both parties.
So it turns a potential conflict into a collaborative brainstorming session.
Exactly.
That's great. Okay, so what is principle number 2?
It's about showing respect for other people's opinions.
Well, that seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that just basic good manners?
Well, it's more than just being polite. It's about genuinely valuing the other person's perspective,
Okay.
even if you completely disagree with it.
Huh.
And here's a key point. Carnegie suggests acknowledging and validating the other person's opinion before presenting your own.
Oh, so not just like brushing off their viewpoint.
Exactly, because think about how it feels when someone just dismisses your ideas
Oh, yeah.
without even really considering them. It makes you feel unheard and disrespected.
Right. Totally.
But when someone takes the time to at least acknowledge your perspective, even if they ultimately disagree, it creates a sense of trust and openness.
So it's kind of like you're disarming their defenses before you even present your own case?
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, because when people feel heard and respected, they're much more likely to be receptive to what you have to say.
Okay.
It turns a potential debate into more of a collaborative exploration of ideas.
I like that. Okay, I'm liking these so far. Let's move on to principle number 3. What's next?
This one might be a bit tougher to swallow. It's about admitting your mistakes quickly and emphatically.
Ooh, that one hits close to home, I think, for a lot of us. Admitting we're wrong can be tough on the ego,
Right.
but I'm curious why Carnegie thinks it's so important.
He makes a really interesting point. He says owning up to our mistakes actually strengthens our credibility in the long run.
Okay.
It shows that we're honest and humble, which are qualities that people generally admire, especially in leaders.
Right. It's funny because I think we have this misconception that we need to appear perfect to be respected or taken seriously.
Yeah.
But it's actually the opposite, right? People connect with authenticity.
Exactly. Think about it. Would you rather follow a leader who tries to cover up their mistakes or one who readily admits them and then takes steps to correct them?
For sure, the second one.
The second one builds trust, and it shows that they're human just like everyone else.
Right. So it's not just about like being honest. It's about taking responsibility and being willing to learn from your mistakes.
Right. And that applies to our personal relationships too, wouldn't you say? Think about those times when someone just refuses to admit they were wrong no matter what.
Ugh.
It just creates so much tension and resentment.
Totally. Being able to acknowledge your mistakes and apologize genuinely can be so powerful in any relationship.
It shows that you care more about the connection than about always being right.
Than about being right. Yeah.
It's about prioritizing the relationship over your ego. And in the long run, that's what strengthens those bonds.
Okay, so we've covered the first three principles: avoid arguments, show respect for other opinions, and admit mistakes quickly. And honestly, I think those three alone could make a huge difference in how we approach conversations.
They're foundational for sure.
Yeah.
But Carnegie doesn't stop there. He goes on to outline 6 more principles for winning people to your way of thinking.
Well, we're going to need a whole other deep dive to unpack the rest of those, aren't we?
We are.
All right. Well, stay tuned because we'll be back soon to dive into those remaining principles. Until then,
Keep practicing those first 3.
we'll see you soon for part 2.
Absolutely.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We are picking up right where we left off, exploring Dale Carnegie's incredible insights on persuasion from his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. If you missed part 1, you might want to catch up on that first, because we laid some serious groundwork.
Yeah, we tackled those first 3 principles,
Yeah.
which are all about, setting the right foundation
Right.
for effective communication.
Yeah.
Avoiding those unproductive arguments.
Right.
Genuinely respecting different viewpoints.
Yeah.
And having the humility to admit when you've made a mistake.
And I think what struck me most about those first 3 is that they really apply to pretty much any interaction, whether it's like a, high-stakes negotiation at work,
Right.
or just like having a conversation with your partner.
Absolutely. They're fundamental principles
Yeah.
of human interaction.
Yeah.
But as you said, Carnegie doesn't stop there.
Right.
He lays out 6 more principles, each kind of building on the previous ones, to create this framework for communication that's rooted in empathy and, well, just plain good sense.
Okay, I'm ready for more. Hit me with principle number 4.
This one is about setting the right tone from the get-go. Carnegie calls it begin in a friendly way.
Okay.
Or, as some interpretations put it, begin conversations on a positive note.
Okay, that seems pretty intuitive. Who wants to start a conversation with negativity?
Right. But it's more than just slapping on a fake smile and pretending everything's sunshine and rainbows.
Right.
Carnegie is talking about genuine warmth and a sincere effort to find common ground.
Yeah.
Right from the start. He stresses starting with genuine praise or acknowledging shared achievements before diving into any potentially tricky topics.
It's like, setting the stage for more collaborative interaction.
Exactly.
Instead of like coming in with guns blazing, ready to argue your point.
Exactly. It's about creating that cooperative atmosphere rather than an adversarial one.
Yeah.
About it. If you're in a negotiation, are you more likely to work with someone who greets you warmly and finds some common ground first, or someone who immediately throws out like a lowball offer?
Definitely the first one.
Right.
It just feels more human.
Right.
Like you're building rapport before you get down to business.
And that human element is so key to effective persuasion. Because when people feel like you genuinely see them and appreciate their perspective, they're much more likely to open up to what you have to say.
It takes the pressure off.
Exactly.
Right? It's not this battle of ideas where you're trying to force your viewpoint onto them.
It shifts the dynamic from me versus you to us working together.
Yeah.
And that sense of collaboration makes a world of difference when it comes to persuasion.
Plus, you might actually learn something new from listening to their perspective.
Absolutely. Active listening is so crucial, not just in persuasion, but in all aspects of communication.
Okay, principle number 5, hit me.
This one might seem counterintuitive, especially when we're talking about persuasion. Carnegie says, let the other person do a great deal of the talking.
Wait, hold on. If I'm trying to persuade someone, shouldn't I be doing most of the talking? How am I going to get my point across if they're hogging the conversation?
That's what I thought too at first. But Carnegie's reasoning here is really insightful.
Okay.
He suggests that by encouraging others to share their thoughts and feelings, you actually make them more receptive to your ideas later on.
So it's not about dominating the conversation. It's about actually listening
Exactly.
and giving them the space to express themselves.
Precisely. Because when people feel like they've been heard and understood, they're much more likely to be open to hearing your perspective as well.
It takes the pressure off.
Exactly.
That's not this battle of ideas where you're trying to force your viewpoint onto them.
It shifts the dynamic from me versus you to us working together.
Mm-hmm.
And that sense of collaboration makes a world of difference when it comes to persuasion.
Makes sense. Okay, principle number 6. Hit me.
This one builds nicely on the previous principle. It's about making the other person feel important and do it sincerely.
Okay, so more than just empty flattery, because everyone can spot a phony a mile away.
Carnegie's talking about genuine appreciation. It's about recognizing and acknowledging the other person's contributions, their talents, their efforts, those things that often go unnoticed,
Yeah.
but that are important to them.
Right, and it's about doing it sincerely, right? Because everyone wants to feel valued.
Exactly. When you make someone feel important, you're tapping into a fundamental human need, the need for recognition and validation.
And this goes way beyond just trying to get someone to do what you want, right? It's about building genuine connections.
Absolutely.
And making people feel good about themselves.
It's a win-win situation. It strengthens relationships. It builds trust, and it just generally creates a more positive and productive environment.
Okay, so I can see how this ties in with letting the other person do the talking.
Right.
When you genuinely listen to someone, you're more likely to pick up on those things you can genuinely appreciate about them.
That's a great point. These principles really do build on each other.
All right, what's next?
Principle number 7 gets a bit more strategic. Carnegie calls it appeal to the nobler motives.
Now that one sounds interesting. What exactly does he mean by nobler motives?
He's talking about framing your requests or arguments in a way that aligns with the other person's values and aspirations.
Okay.
Those things that inspire them and give them a sense of purpose.
So instead of just appealing to their self-interest,
Right.
You're appealing to their desire to be a good person, to make a positive impact.
Exactly. Because people are much more likely to be persuaded when they believe that their actions are contributing to something larger than themselves.
Yeah.
Something meaningful.
So it's about finding that common ground, not just in terms of goals,
Right.
but also in terms of values.
Absolutely. Think about it. If you're trying to motivate your team to take on a new project, you could just focus on the potential financial rewards.
Right.
Or career advancement.
Or like, hey, you'll get a promotion if you do this.
Yeah. But a more effective approach might be to emphasize how this project will benefit the community or help solve a pressing social issue.
Ah, so you're tapping into their desire to make a positive difference in the world.
Exactly.
And honestly, that's a much more powerful motivator than just dangling a carrot in front of them.
It's about inspiring them, not just incentivizing them.
Yeah.
And that's what truly drives lasting change.
Okay, on to principle number 8. What's Carnegie got for us?
This one's all about making your ideas stick. He calls it dramatize your ideas.
So we're adding some theatrics to our persuasion techniques now.
And not necessarily a full-blown theatrical production,
Okay.
but Carnegie recognized the power of storytelling and vivid imagery. He's suggesting we present our ideas in a way that captures people's attention and makes them truly memorable.
Yeah, it's about going beyond just dry facts and figures, right?
Wow.
It's about making an emotional connection.
Exactly. Think about how much more engaging a story is compared to a list of bullet points.
Oh, yeah.
Or how a powerful image can evoke emotions and stay with you long after you've seen it.
Right, we see this all the time in advertising.
Absolutely.
Those commercials that tell a story. Or use like stunning visuals to create a feeling.
Absolutely. Because they understand that people connect with stories and emotions
Yeah.
much more deeply than they do with logic and reason alone.
All right. I'm feeling inspired to add a bit more drama to my communication. What's the final principle? Bring it on.
This one's a bit more bold. Carnegie says throw down a challenge.
Now, how does that work in persuasion? Isn't it more likely to put people on the defensive?
Carnegie understood that people are inherently motivated by challenges,
Okay.
that desire to prove themselves and achieve something difficult.
Yeah.
By framing a task or request as a challenge, you're tapping into that innate drive to succeed.
So instead of just telling someone to do something,
Right.
you're giving them a chance to like rise to the occasion.
Precisely. Think about it. If your boss just says, we need to increase sales by 10%,
Yeah.
It might not be very motivating, but if they frame it as a challenge,
Yeah.
saying, I believe this team can achieve a 15% increase, let's prove everyone wrong and make history,
Right.
that's much more likely to light a fire under people.
I love that. It turns a mundane task into an exciting opportunity for growth and achievement.
Exactly.
It's like you're giving them ownership.
Right.
And empowering them to step up.
It taps into their competitive spirit and their desire to be part of something bigger than themselves.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have
9 principles that are all about understanding human psychology and creating a more effective and fulfilling way to communicate.
It's about moving away from those win-lose scenarios and embracing a more collaborative, empathetic approach.
And I think what's really powerful is that these principles apply to so many different situations, from leading a team at work to navigating those tricky conversations with family and friends.
They're timeless principles of human interaction.
I feel like we've just scratched the surface here.
We have.
Yeah.
But we're going to need one more deep dive.
Right.
To really tie everything together.
So stay tuned for part 3, where we'll recap all 9 principles and talk about how you can actually start putting this wisdom into practice in your own life.
We'll explore how to tailor these techniques to different situations and share some final thoughts on the power of effective communication.
We'll see you soon. Welcome back to the deep dive. So I hope you've got your notepads ready, because we are wrapping up our exploration of Dale Carnegie's 9 principles for winning people to your way of thinking. We've covered a lot of ground over these past 2 deep dives.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey through this psychology of persuasion, hasn't it?
It has.
And what's remarkable is how relevant Carnegie's advice remains, even though, How to Win Friends and Influence People was published almost a century ago.
Right, and I think what makes these principles so enduring is that they're not about manipulation or trickery.
Right.
It's really about understanding human nature.
Yeah.
And using that knowledge to communicate more effectively.
Exactly. It's about creating those win-win situations where everyone feels heard, respected, and ultimately more inclined to see things from your perspective. But it's not about forcing your views on anyone.
Right.
It's about fostering genuine connection and understanding.
All right, so before we dive into how to actually apply these principles in our own lives, let's do a quick recap of all 9. You ready?
Absolutely. Fire away.
Okay, principle number 1, avoid arguments. Carnegie's big idea here is that you're not going to persuade anyone when their defenses are up.
Right.
Instead of trying to win the debate, find common ground and work towards a solution that benefits everyone.
And that leads nicely into principle number 2.
Right.
Show respect for other people's opinions.
Right. Even if you think someone's idea is completely off base,
Right.
take the time to acknowledge their perspective before presenting your own.
Exactly.
It shows you value their input and creates a more open and collaborative atmosphere.
Principle number 3 is one we could probably all use a reminder of from time to time.
Yeah.
Admit mistakes quickly and emphatically.
Right.
It can be tough on the ego, but owning up to your mistakes actually builds trust. And it shows that you're more interested in learning and growing than in saving face.
Than in being right.
And then we move into setting the right tone for persuasion with principle number 4.
Yeah.
Begin in a friendly way.
Okay.
This isn't about being fake or saccharine. It's about finding genuine common ground and starting the conversation on a positive note. People are much more receptive to your ideas when they feel like you're on their side.
Principle number 5 is one that I initially found kind of counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Let the other person do a great deal of the talking, but it makes so much sense when you think about it. People are much more likely to listen to you if they feel like you've truly listened to them.
It's about making them feel heard and understood, which creates a sense of trust and connection. And it gives you valuable insights into their perspective, which can help you tailor your arguments more effectively.
Principle number 6 builds on that idea of connection.
Right.
Make the other person feel important and do it sincerely. We all crave validation and appreciation, so taking the time to genuinely acknowledge someone's contributions can go a long way in building rapport and influencing their opinions.
It's about finding those genuine moments to express appreciation, not just throwing out empty flattery.
Right. Principle number 7 is all about appealing to people's higher motivations. Appeal to the nobler motives. Instead of just focusing on self-interest, frame your requests or arguments in a way that aligns with their values and aspirations. People are much more likely to be persuaded if they believe their actions are contributing to something meaningful.
It's about tapping into that desire to make a positive impact on the world.
Principle number 8 is where things get a bit more creative. Dramatize your ideas.
Right.
We're not talking about putting on a theatrical performance, but rather using storytelling, vivid language, and compelling imagery to make your ideas more memorable and engaging.
Think about the difference between reading a dry textbook and getting swept up in a captivating story.
Yeah.
Stories stick with us, they evoke emotions, and they make us care.
And finally, principle number 9, throw down a challenge. Carnegie understood that people are inherently motivated by challenges. By framing a task or request as a challenge, you're tapping into that innate desire to prove themselves and achieve something difficult.
It's about inspiring people to rise to the occasion,
Yeah.
exceed their own expectations.
Wow, 9 principles that are all about understanding human nature and using that knowledge to communicate more effectively and build stronger relationships.
And the beauty of these principles is that they can be applied in so many different contexts at work, in our personal relationships, even in our communities.
So the big question now is, how do we actually put all of this into practice? It's one thing to understand the concepts, but it's another thing to actually integrate them into our daily interactions.
You're absolutely right. And I think the key is to start small.
Okay.
Pick 1 or 2 principles that resonate with you the most and make a conscious effort to apply them in your conversations. For example, if you find yourself getting defensive in arguments,
Yeah.
focus on principle number 1. Avoid arguments.
Right.
Practice staying calm, listening actively, and looking for common ground instead of trying to prove your point.
That's a great suggestion. It's about building those new communication habits one step at a time. And as you become more comfortable with those first few principles, you can start incorporating others into your repertoire.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to experiment. See what works best for you in different situations. The key is to be intentional about your communication and keep those principles top of mind.
It's like any new skill, it takes practice. But with time and effort, we can all become more persuasive, more influential, and ultimately more effective communicators.
And more importantly, I think we can build stronger, more fulfilling relationships with the people around us.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a question to ponder. Which of these 9 principles resonated with you the most? And what's one conversation you can approach differently starting today?
It's been a pleasure exploring these timeless principles with you. Remember, the power to build stronger relationships and create more positive outcomes lies within each of us.
Thank you for joining us on the deep dive. We'll be back soon with another fascinating topic to explore. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and keep diving deep.